Welcome to Let the Boys Kiss, the creation of queer ships, where we ask the question, is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
This week, we'll be discussing Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin from Master and Commander, This Far Side of the World. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Kelsey. Hey everyone. So we know you might be surprised by the intro that we just did, since last time we said we were going to be covering Edgin and Zank from Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves.
Surprise!
But as you heard, that's not what's happening today.
No.
But why, you might ask?
Well, here's the thing. When we said we were going to do Dungeons and Dragons next, we had not yet watched the film. And now we have, and we liked it. It's lovely. Big fans.
It was fun.
But in researching the ship and the sort of fan activity surrounding the ship, it felt a little bit light for its own full episode. So while we still want to cover it eventually, we've decided to try to package it with some other things to make an episode that won't just be 20 minutes long, say.
Yes.
So in an effort to do that, we're calling out to you for assistance.
Yes. So our idea with this is, we've all heard the rumors that Dungeons and Dragons Honor Amongst Thieves, is it Among or Amongst?
I think it's Among.
Yeah. Honor Among Thieves may get a sequel. Chris Pine's always talking about it.
Yeah.
And we think that, if there was more content there, there'd be more to dig into. So we're trying to put together an episode we're calling Ships That Have Yet to Set Sail, Ships Still in the Dock. I don't know. Something like that.
Something nautical,
Where you watch something and there was like the seed of a great ship, but it maybe wasn't enough. Whether it's a TV show that should have gotten more seasons or a movie that needed sequels. If there's anything else like that where you're like, oh, there was a lot here. It just needed a chance to grow.
Yeah, to blossom. We want to hear from you. So send us all of those ships that should have gotten more time, should have happened. If there had been more of it, it would have sailed. That's what we want to talk about. So send them in. We're excited to eventually talk about Dungeons and Dragons. But in the meantime, we're very excited
we have a lovely
to bring you
episode for you where we're going to cover, as we said, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, which honestly is also a movie that probably should have gotten some sequels. But
absolutely.
There's a lot of content in what we got, so we think there's enough there to have a full discussion about it.
Please enjoy.
We're back in the seas of the Americas.
The seas of the Americas. It's so nice to be back.
Sailing around way back in the past, age of sailing. What a time.
What a time to be alive. It's like 1805. So cast your minds back.
Napoleonic Wars.
Yep. Here we are on a British naval ship.
Mm-hmm.
South America.
Yep. Right around Brazil.
What are we doing here?
Well, we're trying to capture a French privateer called the Acheron.
And who are we? Apparently I've been hit on the head because I have no idea what's going on.
Well, we're a ship full of British people, to be honest. So the whole, a lot. There's a lot of people on the ship.
Yeah.
But in particular, we are the captain, Jack Aubrey, and ship's doctor, Stephen Maturin, played by Russell Crowe and Paul Bettany, respectively.
Yes.
And these two characters come from Patrick O'Brian's series of novels, but we have not read the novels.
No, it's 20 novels. That would be asking quite a bit, if I'm being honest.
We watched the 2003 adaptation, Master and Commander, Far Side of the World.
Hell yeah, we have. This is an interesting one because we have been brought here from our other podcast. This is something that we watched for our Oscars podcast, and we were like, hey, it's a little bit queer. Maybe we should be bringing this on over to our other podcast.
And I believe, right, this pairing came up in our Star Trek 09 episode when
it sure did.
Chris Pine compared him and Zachary Quinto's Spock to Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin.
A queerer reference than he intended.
Yes, we think so. We don't think he realized quite what he said. But yeah, we'll get into it. We'll get into these two. These two.
So we're going to do our usual thing where we go through why do people ship them? Let's talk about the events of the film before we get into any more analysis than that. So as you said, it's 1805. We're a
Mm-hmm.
British naval ship. We're looking
Yep.
for a French privateer because we're at war with France. So that's sort of the setup. They get into some battle stuff pretty quickly, and our relationship is established at the beginning
Yes.
of the film. So the two of them are already the captain and the doctor. They're already best friends. They're very close. They're intimates.
Yes, I don't know if it's worth saying, but this movie is primarily an adaptation of the 10th of 20 novels. There's like some things that are borrowed from some of the other books, but we're in it.
Yeah, it's a combination of some books. Yeah.
We're in it. It's not the first novel. I don't know if the first novel starts in process
I
yet.
no, I think the first novel is called Master and Commander, but it is about them meeting each other. So
Prequel.
prequel. I think they've been talking about making a prequel for quite some time. It may or may not come to pass, but they have been. Hollywood has been speaking of it. So yeah, we do just sort of jump right in the middle of the story. We're already best friends. So at the very beginning of the movie, there's sort of a battle, shit goes down, and then right after the battle, the captain goes to the doctor to be like, here's what happened. And the doctor's like, oh, you have a little cut on your forehead. Let me stitch you up. And so then they
Yes.
have a little sweet recapping of events that serves as exposition for the film, but also lets you know, like, oh, they're besties.
Yeah. It's a classic, like, you're injured. Sit down. Let me take a look at this.
But the captain doesn't put up any fight. I love that he's
No.
not like, oh, I'm macho. You can't take care of me. He's like, oh, okay. Yes, tend to me.
Thanks, Steven. And yeah, there's just like a ton of little moments as we're getting into the film. There's a lot of characters in this movie. Like we
Yes.
said, it's a very populated ship,
It is a ship full of characters. Yeah.
but we do get these fun moments in them together. One of the things about the relationship is they play music together.
Ah, yes. So Stephen plays cello and Jack plays violin and a little two-man string band.
Yes. So to relax, they'll just get together and play their songs. It's
Yeah.
very cute.
It's adorable. There are, as we said, there's lots of funny moments, but the best funny moment of the thing is a great pun, a top-notch pun. So the like captains or whatever you would call that class of people
Heads
that
of
aren't,
departments.
yeah,
Or something.
exactly, all get together for dinner a lot, and so they're like drinking and joking and have a great time. And on one of these events, the captain is like, Steven, do you see those two weevils there? And they're on a ship, so it's nasty, and there's just fucking like bugs everywhere.
Bugs
So he's
on the
pointing
plates,
at the weevils on the plate, and he's like, "If you had to choose, which of those two weevils would you choose?" And Stephen, of course, being the scientist doctor that he is, starts to get into like his analysis. And well, I guess if you really made me choose, this one, it looks like it's a little bit bigger and stronger, so I guess I would pick that weevil. And Jack is like, oh, Stephen, don't you know that you always choose the lesser of two weevils?
And everyone laughs and laughs. And Steven just looks at the captain like, oh my fucking God, this guy.
You are so embarrassing. He says to him, he who would pun would pick a pocket. He really doesn't like it, but it's a great joke.
It is.
Come
It is.
on.
I said on our Oscars podcast that when we covered it there, I was telling a friend about it. And she was like, oh, is that the movie with the lesser of two weevils scene? And I was like, yeah, it is.
That's how memorable this joke is. If you're ever in your life coming across two weevils somewhere, have this joke in your pocket.
Yeah. Pull it on someone. It's a good time. Don't you know you always choose the lesser of two
weevils? It's quite good. So yeah, there's lots of little moments with the two of them. They continue. Part of the like heart of their relationship really is that Stephen is the captain's only confidant, because obviously he's the captain of the ship. You're not really like sharing your innermost thoughts and feelings with all of the men under your command. So anytime something is happening where the captain has mixed feelings about it, or he doesn't know if he's made the right decision, he's always going to Stephen to sort of hash it out. And Stephen is his sounding board, and he's also the only one who tells him what he really thinks. So if he thinks that he's made a bad decision at some point, he is the only one who's going to say it to him.
He's allowed to speak freely.
Right. And so there is a pretty tense emotional moment when something has happened with their ship where the like mast breaks and there's a storm, there's all sorts of stuff going on. There's a man overboard basically who's sort of wrapped up with the broken part of the mast. And they can either try to save him, or unfortunately, because of the storm, the mast is going to threaten to bring the whole ship down if they don't disconnect it from the boat. And so they end up deciding to disconnect it from the boat, which dooms the poor guy who's tied up in it to die, but it saves the rest of the ship. So, of course, the captain feels, some feelings about this. And he goes to Stephen afterwards to be consoled.
Yeah, that's a rough scene. The way we just watch that guy be taken away by the waves. Like, you just see him getting further and further out to sea, and you're like, oh boy.
Yeah. Well, it's dark because the captain and people who are that guy's friends are having to, like, hack away at the ropes that are keeping it attached to the boat. And it takes a lot of effort to send this guy to his death. It's pretty rough.
Yeah.
But Stephen is there to be like, you did what you had to do. There was no other decision you could have made.
He gives a nice little analogy about how, when he loses a patient, he's like, it's not me, we're in war. He's a casualty of war.
Yeah. And you have to remember that, it's not you that did this to him. It's the French, those pesky French. But then this does interesting lead to, again, the thing we were talking about of him being the only one who's allowed to speak his mind. Because the reason we're still out here on this quest is the French privateer that they're trying to catch is a much faster, newer, better ship than their ship. So multiple times we've sort of come upon them and not been able to catch them, or they've been chasing us and we've had to elude them. And the captain won't give up the mission of chasing the ship, even though it seems apparent to everyone that even if they could catch the ship, there's no guarantee that they could take it down because it's a much better ship than theirs. And so they're continuing on this mission. And after this guy has died, he's having a crisis of confidence. And he is asking Stephen, like, are the men talking about this? Like, is there discontent among the ranks? Because that's something you always have to be on the lookout for. And Stephen is like, well, before I answer this, like, am I answering as your doctor or as your friend? And he's like, well, okay, I guess as my friend. And so he says, I've never doubted your abilities as a captain, but perhaps we should have turned back weeks ago. The fact that you're still chasing this ship is starting to seem like it's a personal thing for you, not anything. It's not like your orders to chase the ship until everyone dies. And so the captain's like, but it's my duty, because he's really into duty. That's kind of the whole thing with the British Navy, right? It's my duty to do it. And he's like, it seems like you're doing it out of your own pride. And he's like, no, I have to. It's my duty. It's not my orders. But I passed my orders months ago. So he's like just really committed to this. And you're like, that's a wild thing to say to someone on your ship. It's a good thing you can trust him that that's not going to get out.
It's important to have a friend. And, as we'll continue along, they're just very open with each other. They just say what their feelings are. I told you, one of my favorite parts in this movie is Stephen is talking about how, the Navy conscripts people and takes them from their lives to be in the Navy. So he's like, well, maybe if the Navy didn't do that, it would be better. And the captain goes, Stephen, I wish you wouldn't talk about the service that way. It makes me feel so low.
It makes me feel so low. I love that argument so much.
Yeah.
So this is sort of their dynamic. There's a lot of this back and forth. But the sort of heart of the plot of the film and the relationshipy parts of their dynamic kick off when we find out we've come around the Horn at the bottom of South America. We're headed up towards the Galapagos. Yes. And they're like, okay, we're probably going to have to stop at the Galapagos to refuel and get some water. And Stephen is not only a doctor and surgeon, he's also a budding naturalist. And so he's like, oh, if I could get onto this Galapagos island, the specimens I would collect.
Right. I think it is a little bit that this takes place pre-Darwin. So this is like an alternate universe where he would be the first naturalist to get onto the Galapagos. So we know, right? Oh boy, that's some stakes.
This is a big opportunity. and seemingly Stephen knows this as well. So he sort of expresses early on, that would be great if I could get there. He's hinting to the captain, I would love to go onto the Galapagos. And the captain is like, totally, we're going to have to refuel. It's going to be a few days. You're definitely going to get a chance. I promise you that you will get a chance to go hang out on the Galapagos. And then
they get up to the Galapagos, close by. They're almost there. And someone has spotted Acheron. And he's like, change course. We got to go after this ship. And what does Stephen do? He busts into the captain's office in his full naturalist costume.
You guys have to see his naturalist costume. It's incredible. It's like this beautiful floral robe and a
Yes.
hat and a scarf. It's a wonderful outfit.
He's gotten all dressed up
Mm-hmm.
to go get some
He
specimens.
barges in and says, "Jack, have you forgotten your promise?" And they have a whole argument.
Yes, and he's like, I know I said that, but my dude. And he's like, I didn't know your promises were conditional.
Mm-hmm. He says, "You see, for my part, I look upon a promise as binding. It did not occur to me until today that we were not of the same opinion."
It's a very catty argument.
My favorite thing about it is something he doesn't even say. It's like the trope of him barging in and he's like wearing this outfit. To me, it always reads as he comes in and he's like, "Do you see what I'm wearing? Like, I'm ready to go adventuring." I love it so much. But yeah, they have this fight. He's like, gets all upset, and the captain is like, "It was conditional. I command a kingship, not a private yacht. We don't have time for your damned hobbies." And then Stephen angrily
So hurtful,
barges
honestly.
out, and the captain's like, "I'm gonna have to deal with this now."
Yeah.
So anyway, plot. They chase the Acheron for a bit. And then they end up, they don't get it because we can't get the Acheron yet. That's obviously going to happen at the end of the movie.
Yes.
And so we end up in a place where we're in the doldrums. We make an app.
Rough.
It's really rough, guys. Anytime you're watching a ship thing and there's doldrums, it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be in the doldrums. So people get all upset because, when you're in the doldrums, you never know if you're going to get out of them. They could all die of thirst or starvation out there.
Yeah.
And so there's like unrest among all of the guys. They've all started to get it into their heads that there's a Jonah on board. So that's someone who's like bad luck and has cursed the ship. And so they all pick this one guy that they think is the Jonah, and they end up badgering him so much that he commits suicide. It's very dark. But in the meantime, one of them is disrespectful to him. The guy's a captain of some kind, not like, I don't remember anybody's title.
Like a lieutenant.
Right. And so a guy is disrespectful to him. Jack is like, "I'm going to have to punish him because you have to maintain."
You got to nip stuff in the bud when you're on a ship, particularly in a rough patch, right? Like, you can't let things get away because then everyone's going to start being disrespectful and then it's all downhill from there.
Mm-hmm. And so Stephen again is like, "I can't believe that you're thinking about flogging this guy. All he did was like not tip his cap to his superior." But Stephen's not really into the whole hierarchical Navy thing.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't dig that. He's really only on this ship because he is friends with the captain and also doesn't mind adventuring a little bit.
He's doing some experimental surgery out there.
He does brain surgery on the boat.
Yeah. It's really wild.
It's really crazy. But anyway, yeah, they have more disagreement. He's challenging the captain. This is a very important part of their relationship. But then, yeah, they finally get out of the doldrum. But some idiot on the ship, I can't even express how stupid this guy is.
They see an albatross that's circling the ship.
Yep.
And despite their superstitions about the Jonah, this guy is like, "I'm going to kill that albatross."
Which, I mean, you and I have minimal knowledge about sea superstitions, but I'm fairly sure that you're not supposed to shoot an albatross. And I believe this is a main plot point of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, that they shoot the albatross and it curses them.
Well, the bad luck comes home to roost very quickly because this guy tries to shoot the albatross, but he does it like not like, if you were going to shoot something outside the ship, you would try to shoot outside the ship.
Away from the ship? Yeah.
He shoots across the deck and gets Stephen, our doctor, our very important member of our crew, the doctor, right in the gut.
You wouldn't want to shoot, indeed.
Right in the gut.
This changes things pretty rapidly because the bullet's still in there. They've also said that a piece of his shirt went in with the bullet, so if that stays in there, all hell's gonna break loose. He's gonna go like septic.
Infection city.
Crazy infections. And so somebody needs to get it out. But the guy who works most closely with Stephen doesn't know what the hell he's doing. He's like, "Maybe I'll be able to do it myself if I just have a minute to read like some of Stephen's books." And you're like,
and if I like get a drink, and it would be a lot easier if the ship weren't rocking.
This is not a good idea. And so as this is happening and the captain's getting worried about like, how's all this gonna go down, somebody spots the fucking Acheron. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of this situation, we're going to have to go after the Acheron? And all of the people under him are like, should we get ready to fight then? Like, what are we doing? And the captain just walks away, goes to his quarters, sits for a bit, and looks at Stephen's cello, and then makes a decision. Nah, we are not going after the Acheron. We're headed straight for the Galapagos because we got to get on land so that this surgery can be performed and Stephen won't be hurt. And Stephen needs to recover. It's very important.
Yes.
They go to the Galapagos and lots of little sweet things happen. They're carrying him onto the island and Stephen is like, tell me this wasn't on my account. And Jack's like, no, not at all. I just needed to stretch my legs. And so they're carrying him and he's telling the guys carrying Stephen, gently there. Like, it's very nice. And then they get into the surgery room and Stephen is like, you will not be performing the surgery. I will be performing the surgery on myself. Someone just hold a mirror. Yeah. And so then Jack is about to leave and like, okay, you guys, you got this handled? And Stephen's like, no, you have to stay. I'm going to need another pair of steady hands. And this is great. He says, a fair pair of steady hands wouldn't go amiss. That is, of course, if you have the constitution for this sort of thing. And Jack says, my dear doctor, I have been amongst and around wounds all my life, even though he looks like he's about to vomit. He does not want to be a part of this. And Stephen says, oh, good then. Put your hand on my belly, pressing firmly when I give the word. And so then there's this like lovely surgery scene where Jack is trying not to pass out while he helps Stephen perform the surgery, and all goes well. In the middle of it, Stephen has to ask Jack, are you all right? And it's like, you currently are digging around in your own insides, but it's nice that you're concerned. And so then it is successful. He gets out the shirt and the bullet. Thank God. And so then Stephen wakes up however long later after he has slept post-surgery. And he is like, hey, we're still in the Galapagos. What's the deal with that? How long does the captain intend to stay? And then he goes to talk to the captain, and the captain says, oh, a week perhaps. And Stephen says, a week? The captain says, there's no great hurry. And Stephen says, mustn't we make haste for? And Jack says, I'm not even sure it was the Acheron we sighted.
Yeah.
And if it was,
you're concerned about it.
And if it was, she'll be well away by now. Like looking for an honest man in Parliament. No, we shall head home before peace breaks out with France, God forbid. And Stephen says, Jack, I fear you may have burdened me with a debt I can never fully repay. And Jack says, tosh, name a shrub after me. Something prickly and hard to eradicate. And Stephen says, a shrub? Nonsense. I'll name a great tortoise after you. Testudo Aubrey. And so he's like, great, I'm going to get to do my research.
Yeah. And it's, your classic scene of someone being like, I've dropped everything else for my loved one. This is the most important thing in my life. Forget this other thing that was driving me very intensely moments before.
Exactly.
So yes, he is now going to have time to go and explore the Galapagos and collect specimens and do his naturalist thing in this untouched land. And so he heads out across the island to do that, and eventually he makes his way to a hilltop.
Where he finally sees the flightless cormorant that he's been looking for.
Yes, he's been really after a flightless cormorant, but he also sees the Acheron.
The goddamn Acheron! It's like, why won't they just leave the Galapagos alone?
They're being haunted by the Acheron. And so they start to make their way back, and he's struggling, right? Because he's just recovered from surgery and being shot and whatever else. And he's out there with another guy, and he tells them, like, we have to open the cages. They drop all their specimens so that the guy he's out there with can carry him back, piggyback ride style, because they got to get back to tell Jack that they've spotted the Acheron.
There it is,
so
it's the Acheron.
2 sacrifices right after the other for the wants and desires of each other.
So, yet again, we're off after the Acheron. The captain does some cool captain-y things and manages to finally make it so that they can get into an actual battle with the Acheron. So this battle happens. Well, first, they pretend to be whalers. little side note.
Yeah, so this is the movie, like, we haven't really talked about our feelings about the movie, but this is the movie being really well structured, where basically Jack comes in after they've set off after the Acheron. And they managed to keep some of their specimens, but in particular they have a walking stick bug, and they show Jack the walking stick bug, and they're like, look, it's a insect that disguises itself as something else to capture, its prey or whatever. And he's like,
what an idea. But he does get this because he's come in to say, So, Steven, did you get to see your bird? Like, he feels
Yeah.
bad that he didn't. And so then he's like, no, well, yeah, but I didn't catch one. Mostly I saw your ship. And he says, I'm sorry you had to leave the majority of your collection behind, Steven. You're like, this is nice of you. But yeah, he has this realization that if they could pretend to look like something else, then maybe they could capture the Acheron. And so the Acheron is a privateer, which I don't know how much people know about this, but that's basically like a pirate that the government pays for. So they go around and they just find non-French ships and they steal all their shit, basically. So they pretend to be a whaler, and the captain takes down his hair.
Yes. He puts on his whaler costume, which
how you
involves not
pretend to
having his
be a
hair in a
whaler.
ponytail.
I love it so much. And so anyway, they prepare, they go into their battle. There are some fun little scenes where Steven also ends up having to battle, and he's pretty handy with his sword. And so they're sharing those looks across the battlefield and like, you good? Yeah, you good? And they're like nodding and having some eye contact, which is always nice. And then they do it. They take the Acheron. They win.
Yes.
And they're like, oh my God, this is great news. We have the Acheron. We've completed our mission. We're done. We've got to, like, we're done. The captain puts his second in command in charge of the Acheron, and he's like, you just take the Acheron back to port or whatever. I'm going to go to the Galapagos. I'm going to take Steven, and we're going to go to the Galapagos, and we're going to, he says, I think I shall return to the Galapagos, take on some food and water, and give the doctor a few days to find his bird. And you're like, yes, we are finally going to the Galapagos. Thank God. And so the two guys sit down to play a little violin and cello again. And unfortunately, Steven should have just kept his trap shut. But they realized in this conversation that they had been told that the captain of the Acheron was dead, but actually he was just pretending to be the ship's doctor.
Yes, because Steven knows that the doctor died of pneumonia months ago.
Yeah. And so clearly they're going to stage some sort of coup and try to take over the ship and blah, blah, blah. And so they're like, oh, well, now we have to go after the Acheron yet again. So
the French.
The goddamn French. And so Steven realizes, oh shit, we're not going to the Galapagos. And he says, subject to the requirements of the service, which is this line that goes back and forth with the two of them. And Jack says, well, Steven, the bird's flightless? Steven says, yes. Jack says, it's not going anywhere. And so then they play their little jaunty tune. They chase after the Acheron with the assumption that someday they will go back to the Galapagos.
God, I hope so. But we'll never know because they never made a sequel.
Yeah, what the hell? This was supposed to be the beginning of a series of films.
Would have been great if the sequel started with them on the Galapagos, just like chilling out.
Yes, it would be cool. It'd be cool if the next film was just them hanging out on the Galapagos the whole time.
Honestly. So those are sort of the beats of their relationship.
Yes.
It's all very sweet and very cute. There's a very interesting element of this film, which I can't think of another example of a boat thing where we see a bunch of children on the boat.
Yes, children. It's very uncommon. So I think this is actually uncommon as it is in films, pretty true to life. They have these children on the ship who are sort of in like the training program to become the eventual captains. So there are these kids who are, you know, sons of fairly important people or whatever who want to get into the service, and they're here to get their on-the-job training. So there's one in particular.
It's hard.
It's very hard to be a ship captain. It takes a lot of work and training.
It's true. And I think we should say, like, generally, it makes the dynamic on the ship pretty interesting. There's quite a paternal relationship between Aubrey and, like, all of the kids.
Yes. And not just Aubrey and all of the kids. I think part of what makes the tone of this film so unique is that the kids are there, and so it affects everyone on the ship. And so they all feel this fondness and affection for these kids that are there, and it makes the whole dynamic on the ship feel warm and in a way that I think a lot of military style ship dynamics usually don't in cinema. So we've got that going on because there are multiple kids and everybody is very lovely with the kids, and it's such a great dynamic. I love it. But there is a particular kid named Blakeney who has a special relationship, shall we say, with both Jack and Steven. So we should go do the little beats of him, I guess.
So we see him early on in that first battle that opens up, and unfortunately he gets injured and has to lose his arm, one of his arms. And And so as he's recovering, the captain comes in and he gives him a book to read about the exploits of someone he had served with, who's like this famous, captain. He's like, read about his exploits, you young captain in training. And that's sort of the first moment that we see between Aubrey and Blakeney, as he's excited to share this history with him.
That he like really wants to be a captain, and he loves naval history, and he's really excited to hear stories about the famous other captains that Jack used to work for. But he also has a connection with Stephen, because Stephen is always doing his research, his naturalist stuff. He has a little book where he keeps drawings of all of the creatures that he sees, and he collects specimens of everything. And so, since the kid's spending a lot of time with the doctor while he is getting treatment, basically, they also have forged this bond. And the first time that they come really close to the Galapagos, but they don't end up getting to go there.
Yes, this is a very sweet scene. This kid is just like an absolute sweetheart.
He's such a little sweetie. But yeah, they're supposed to have gone to the Galapagos. They don't get to go. The kid knows how disappointed he is.
Stephen is sulking.
He's definitely sulking. The kid finds a little beetle on the ship, this black little beetle that he's never seen before. And he takes it to Stephen and he's like, I think this must be a Galapagos beetle.
Yeah. And Stephen's like, oh, you're right.
Yeah, I haven't seen this beetle before. And the kid's like, if we had gone on to the Galapagos, you might never have seen it.
So like, that's a good point.
That's a good point, kid.
And he's like, you can have it. And he's like, oh, thank you, Lord Blakeney.
Lord Blakeney.
And he tips his cap at him. I love this too, because they're always tipping their caps at each other, but no one wears a hat. So they're just kind of making a little
gesture.
A little motion.
Yeah. Which I think we should all start doing.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah. Yes, but it's very sweet of this kid to notice that one of his father figures is very upset and say, like, how can I cheer this guy up? I'll make him feel better. I'm going to give him a little beetle.
And it does make him feel better.
Yeah.
And so then they continue to be very close, all three of them. And when we finally do get to go to the Galapagos a little bit for Stephen's recovery, the Blakeney is one of the people that he takes with him on his journey. So they're out there collecting all of the specimens together, and it's very exciting.
Yes. Before Stephen goes out while he's recovering, Blakeney brings him a journal where he's been doing his own drawings and notes on the wildlife. And he's like, oh, these are very good.
These are very good. And also before they've gone there, he's been studying Stephen's books and seeing all of these creatures he's never seen before. And so this is the setup for the stick bug thing, because he sees a drawing in one of Stephen's books, like, what is this? This just looks like a stick. And Stephen's like, no, it's a creature that makes itself look like a stick. So then, yes, when they're on the island and they find that bug, that sets up the thing with Jack using it as his inspiration later.
Yes. And at one point, Blakeney says to Stephen, like, I would love to combine both things. Maybe I could be, a captain naturalist. And you're like, he wants to be like both of his dads.
It's so sweet. He's a little representative of both of them. So yeah, they're both so proud of him. Because there's another moment. Blakeney has been worried since he lost his arm that he's not going to get to be the captain that he wants to be. And so there is the moment when they finally are in conflict with the Acheron, and he gets told he's not going to be part of the boarding party to go onto the Acheron and fight. And he's very upset about it. But then the captain is like, no, you're going to stay on our ship and take command of the surprise. Yes. And he's like, oh.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And so he takes command of the surprise, but then ultimately ends up commanding everyone on the surprise onto the Acheron, and he gets to go be in battle, and it's great.
Yeah.
And he doesn't die, and one of the other kids does die, and it's very sad.
His closest friend seemingly on the ship does die as part of the boarding, and it's a callback to, again, this movie is super well structured. Yeah. Earlier on in the film, he was talking to someone, and they were like, when you die, they do the final stitches of the bag that they put you in through your nose to make sure you're really dead. And he says to that friend, don't let them do that to me. I don't want that to happen. And so then he's the one stitching up that friend's body bag at the end.
It's so sad. And then the captain says some words over everyone, and everyone on the ship is crying as they do the burial at sea. It's that's the thing with having the kids on board. It works emotionally because you're invested with everyone, but then one of them dies, and then you're really like, oh my god, he looked
Oh,
like he was like 14.
no.
Like, why?
No,
Why has
this
this happened?
child. Yeah, I love Lord Blakeney. I'm sad we didn't get to see him grow up.
Well, yeah, you said to me, which is such a great idea, like,
Yeah.
imagine the moment if you had been invested and they made several of these movies down the line in, movie 4 or 5 or whatever, when Blakeney gets command of his own ship, and it's like, oh, we would all be crying.
And Aubrey and Maturin are seeing him off as he's going to take command of another vessel. And you're like, oh my God, we're saying goodbye to our boy who we've seen grow up and mature and go through trials. I'm so sad we were robbed of this.
I know. But I guess this is what fanfic is for. I hope someone is writing this. So yeah, their relationship with their son, so sweet.
It's a good dynamic.
I think the captain has this connection to him initially because he's the son of presumably other Lord Blakeney, the adult version, who has since died. And so he has taken in this kid to raise him up, and he feels this, like he owes it to his friend, Lord Blakeney, to make sure that little Lord Blakeney is okay. Very sweet. I love having kids. More boat movies need to have kids.
Honestly. It's good. So I think that's the full dynamic of the relationship, right? Stephen and Aubrey have this relationship, and then they also have this shared paternal relationship with this kid, which is very interesting. They're a little family.
Little family.
But then there's other interesting details that we just want to mention that, like, maybe complicate things a little bit. There is a very brief moment, blink and you miss it, where the movie reveals that Aubrey has a wife.
Yeah, there's a moment where you briefly see him writing a letter to Sophie. Honestly, they don't even say that she's his wife, but you see that he's writing a letter.
He's like, my dearest Sophie. If you read it, it's like, my dearest darling Sophie. And then you see a little, like, portrait of her. They had not cast an actress yet to play Sophie, presumably. It's a little drawing of a brunette woman.
Yeah.
And that's the extent to which we're like, oh, I guess he's got a wife.
They don't mention any relationships for Stephen, and there is a moment when they're getting supplies at an island, and all of the islanders have taken little ships out to their boat, and they're bartering over the stuff that they're trying to sell them.
Mm-hmm.
And there is this pretty lady on one of the boats, and Jack makes eye contact with her, and they smiles a little bit and then looks away, and you're like, what was that moment?
It's a weird moment.
I don't know what this is. She's like basically the only woman in the movie.
Yes.
And that's the extent of the moment.
He sees a pretty lady. He kind of goes like, hey, and she's like, hello. And then they don't say that. They just kind of look at each other. And then you're like, what was that?
I don't know. Now, I've done the barest amount of research into the books, so I do know, like, yes, Sophie is Jack's wife. She's a much bigger character throughout the course of the novels. There is a woman who is Stephen's main love interest throughout the course of the novels, who he eventually does end up marrying. So I think there's a lot more on land back home storyline that happens. It is 20 novels, so you got to fill them with something. But it is interesting to me that for this movie, they were like, we don't need any of that. Get rid of all that. It's the boat. It's the men. We will, I guess, throw in this letter to Sophie for some reason
for the sequel, so it doesn't just be like, Letty has a wife, and like, the second one would be like, oh yeah, he was writing that letter to that lady.
Yeah,
but he never talks about his wife with Stephen. He's never like, oh, I miss her, I pined for her.
Nah,
there's
not a lot of pining happening.
No,
he's very fulfilled by his life on the ship. He loves being a captain.
He loves the ship.
We
forgot the part where Stephen called the boat old, and he's like, would you call me
so I was gonna
old?
say there are little tiny moments that I do want to talk about if we're done talking about the main theme. Yeah. So just little moments of their dynamic. The Surprise is the name of their ship, and so at one point when they're talking about how they're probably not going to be able to catch the Acheron because it's a very new and fancy ship, Stephen says, the Surprise is a somewhat aged man of war, and Jack says, she is not old. Would you call me an aged man of war?
And again, Stephen's like, oh my God, am I gonna have to deal with this?
Yeah. The part of their dynamic that makes them feel so married is they're constantly getting into these little snits, and then one of them will be like rolling his eyes like, this again? There's just this like weary, like, oh, we're gonna have this argument for the 1,000th time. That kind of thing is part of their element. So there's that. There are little moments where they just are like little snotty guys. Like there's a time when they're standing on the deck together, and all of the crew don't notice that they're there, and they're like having a great time singing sea shanties and stuff, and they all notice at the same time that the captain is standing right there, except for one guy who has his back to them, and he continues singing when
The
everyone else
Jonah
stops
guy.
singing. I know, the poor Jonah guy. So he continues the song, everyone else has stopped, and it's like a little bit embarrassing. And Stephen, instead of just saying nothing, says, "What a wonderful voice Mr. Hallam possesses." And Jack goes, "Indeed," like just to embarrass him. And you're like, what's wrong with the two of you? And then there's a time when the French ship pops up again. There's this element of the ship being like, they're like, where does it keep coming from? Because
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to follow any of the rules.
It's because that's before they realize how it's constructed. So they're like, how could this ship be this fast and agile? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
And so there's a point when it pops up again, and Jack is saying to Stephen, "What is it with this captain? Did I kill a relative of his in battle? His boy, God forbid?" And Stephen says to him, "He fights like you, Jack." And then they smile at each other. And you're like, oh, so that's sweet. Any other little moments?
I don't think so. I think we covered the bulk of it, but it's good. It's real good. The movie is good. The relationship is good.
Yep.
If you haven't seen Master and Commander, give it a try.
Yeah, what we haven't talked about, what we talked a little bit about the narrative structure being good. I will also say the physical making of the movie is incredible.
It's incredible.
The ship, it seems so real. The battles feel so real. The like sound design and the construction, the way that it's shot, the ship is gorgeous. The naturalism of everything. You see stuff that you probably wouldn't normally see in a ship. They're very committed to the idea of showing you this is what it was actually like to be on the ship.
Well, just like the density of people on the ship. Usually when you watch things that take place on ships, there's like a few people on deck. There's so many people on this boat. It's crowded.
I mean, they tell you at the beginning how many crew members there are, and you're like, oh, yeah, I guess it takes a lot of people to run the ship.
Sure. And we talked about the element that the children is really interesting, and that's not something you see, but again, it makes total sense because it seems so hard to captain a ship. You have to like be able to do a lot of stuff, and you have to know how everything works, right? Which is wild because it just seems hard. Ships seem hard to me. As someone who doesn't know anything about them.
Yeah, well, like how the ship works, but also how to sail the ship. Like Jack is supposed to be a very accomplished captain in terms of how he sails the ship. His strategy is good. Mm-hmm. His control of the ship is good. He is able to figure out various ways to be faster or outsmart the other ship. Or
I will say, everyone's very good at their job. Everyone's a professional here, okay?
We love that. Competency porn. Everybody loves it.
I do.
It's very cool. It's a well-made.
Yeah. It's super good. It's super well made. It's fascinating. It truly is a shame that it was not financially successful, so we could not get more of them. Because, like, Peter Weir did that.
Peter Weir really did that. We also were talking earlier this week, like, not enough love for Peter Weir.
I don't think so. He's done it multiple times. And here, he did it.
He did it. So, yeah, not just the relationship, though the relationship is amazing. The movie is very, very good. Mm-hmm. Give it a watch.
So, we've watched the movie. We only watched it because of the Oscars, but you hadn't seen it before we did it.
No.
Podcast,
I had. It's not a movie that I hadn't heard of.
Yes, we've all heard of it. It has a wacky title.
It's a movie that I had heard was very good. I'd heard people say they really liked it. It was like somewhere nebulously in my head on a list of things that maybe I'll watch someday. But I may never have watched it if we hadn't watched it for the podcast.
Yes, it was not necessarily top of the list.
Mm-hmm.
So we've now seen it.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening in the fic space? Have other people seen it? Are they talking about it?
Indeed. We've skipped right over, by the way, what do the actors and creators say about it, because we should say not a lot.
No. I guess it's worth saying again. Thank you for backing us up. We've talked about this time period before, right? It's 2003. This is like, contemporary with Lord of the Rings. So if you remember our discussion there, and it's a film that we didn't know was going to get any sequels, and it didn't. So there wasn't, like we always talk about with films, a lot of opportunity for fans to be like, Peter Weir, what's going on? Because who knew this movie was coming out right beforehand? And then nothing ever came in terms of sequels. So not a lot of opportunities. And I don't think anyone was asking at the time Russell Crowe or Paul Bettany or Peter Weir or the writers like they would be today. Like, tell us about the dynamics of the relationships.
Or not even today. I was saying to you, this is what, 5 to 8 years before the explosion of the bromance in cinema, where
Mm-hmm.
if they were doing a press tour for this movie in 2010, every interview would have asked them, like, tell me about your
About the
bromance.
romance. And I guess the thing is, too, also to be fair, right? Like, if you see this movie, all the questions you probably would have about it would be like, tell us how you made this
Yeah, it's
thing.
incredible. How did you do this? At least questions for Peter Weir.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that even I would have gotten to like, tell me about the dynamics. I'd be like, how'd you shoot the thing? Like, what? Put it together for me because it looks real.
Yeah. How did you guys really go to battle on 1800s ships? Like, is that how this happened? But yeah, so we don't have, that's to say, we don't
Yes.
have quotes from them about their relationship. So we will,
Skip ahead to the fic.
though that's not to say they don't talk about it, because I will tell you I came across many Russell Crowe tweets where he loves this movie. He desperately wanted to make a sequel to this movie, and anyone who ever disparages it online, he finds them and he corrects them. So that's nice. It's nice to see people go to bat for their movies. But yeah, nothing about the dynamics. So, yes, to your question about the literature, the fandom, what's going on with them. There is a small but notable AO3 Master and Commander tag. There are more for the books than for the movies, so I guess we'll talk about them as a united thing. In the movie tag, there are 183 total fics. In the Master and Commander all media types tag, there are 678, and of these, about half of each are Jack/Stephen fic. By far the biggest ship of the
Yes.
fandom.
Feels like there should be more. It's a good pairing.
Well, and to be fair, as we'll get into in a minute, there were more. It's a transitional sort of time in fandom, right? Like, this fandom did not start on AO3. AO3 did not exist when the movie came out. So a lot of people were writing fic and engaging in fandom elsewhere.
True.
So I don't know if we want to talk about that first or talk about the fic first, whichever.
Let's stick with AO3, I guess, and then we can go back to what else was happening on the internet way back in 2003.
Yes. So as we always do, we've read the top kudos fic, which was a pretty short fic. It's called Admiration by Ashine and cruise director. And tell me about the vibes. What goes on in this fic?
It was a very like classic type of fic, I would say.
Okay.
So basically, everyone's not having a good time on the ship because they're all too horny.
It's like they're going through they're not sailing as fast as they want. The weather's not great, so everyone's getting discontent, and this is how it is expressing itself.
Right. Jack is in a bad mood, and he comes to Stephen, or Stephen comes to him, and he's like, you're being pretty harsh with the crew. And he's like, the crew has been, restless. I don't know what's going on. And Steven's like, everyone wants to go to port because everyone's really horny right now. So that's what's going on. And Jack is like, what should we do? And he's like, well, some of them get distracted by hard work, but for others, there's nothing you can do. Everyone's just having a tough time.
Yeah.
But I've noticed you've been in a bad mood too. He's like, well, I have been restless. I've been having a hard time sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
But I've noticed that for the last few days or weeks or whatever, you haven't been coming up to play music with me as often. Like,
that's
what's
why
going
I've been
on
restless.
there?
We haven't been playing our music.
Yeah, I can't relax. So they play a little music, and he's like, yeah, I'm feeling way better. It really helps me relax when we get together and play our music. They dance together as well.
Yeah, they play a little Irish jig.
And then basically Stephen tells Jack that he loves him.
Yeah, he's like, I've been avoiding you, kind of, because I realized that I like spending time with you too much. And so then he has to like talk Jack into understanding what that means. And there's been this undercurrent through the whole thing of talking around the idea of sodomy, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like the beginning conversation when Stephen's talking to Jack about like, people are frustrated and tense, and he's telling him they come to me with these specific complaints and ailments that I can't tell you about.
These aches.
These aches. So Jack like gets what he's alluding to, and then later he starts to be like, you need to tell me which of the men are coming to you with these complaints. And he's like, I can't rat them out. Like, I'm not about to tell you.
Doctor-patient confidentiality, bro.
He's like, oh, I don't want to throw them in chains or anything. I just want to know who needs a little bit more attention. And you're like, sure. And so then this becomes a thing where Stephen is like, clearly something's wrong. And Jack's like, what's wrong? And Steven's like, I don't really want to tell you because you'll take it wrong. And he's like, are you engaged with one of these men on this ship doing these things we were talking about? I would have to kill him if that were the case. And so then he's like, oh God, no, you're really not going to like what I have to say.
Yeah. But it's just jealousy.
It's just jealousy. So then, yeah, he basically has to like hit him over the head with, it's you that I want to do the things with. So the talking around everything is very funny.
Yeah.
And so then, yeah, Jack is like, oh, okay, well, if it's you, then maybe I could get into that. And so they kiss, and then Jack starts to be like, wait, kissing is cool, but like, what else do you expect us to do?
Yeah, like what is this gonna be? And Steven's like, what do you want it to be? And Jack's like, I can't tell you until you tell me. And Steven's like, well, I can't do what I want to do until you tell me what you'll let me do.
So then they kiss a little bit more, and then they just like start playing their instruments again.
Yeah. Okay, we'll figure this out, I guess.
But yeah, that's the fic. It's a lot of talking around the idea of men having sex with each other.
Yep.
Yep.
I was surprised as I was going along through it that it did not end up like fully explicit into a sex scene. I was like, oh, I thought there was at least going to be a hand job.
So yeah, something. And instead they're just like, well, I can't say. Well, I can't say. And then they literally just are like, well, should we play another tune? Okay.
Yeah.
Man. But yeah, that was the fic.
Yep.
So, as we were alluding to, that is the most popular fic on AO3, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like the most popular fic in all of Master and Commander fandom.
It's true.
Because these books obviously predate the movie, and as long as the books have been around, there has been a fandom of people who have been Aubrey Maturin shippers. And pre-internet, it's kind of hard to do your fandom organizing, as we've discussed a lot of the time.
Yeah, do we know when the first book came out?
I want to say it's the 80s.
Wow.
Oh no, it's the 60s. 1969.
Holy guacamole!
Holy guacamole! It came out in 1969, 1970 in the UK. And then they proceeded to come out for the next several decades. So yes, we know about fandom in these days. It's pretty diffuse. People are mostly doing it on their own or with their friends. But then as we start to come into various ways in which to organize before AO3 exists, there was stuff happening. There were communities on LiveJournal and then later on Dreamwidth pre-AO3. There were groups. There's one called Perfect Strangers that is specifically for Aubrey Maturin shippers. And this is where people were doing their organizing, posting their stories.
Yahoo mailing groups. We've talked about those before.
We love a Yahoo mailing group. So this is a thing that was happening pre-movie. But then the movie came out and, of course, made it more popular, as it's sort of a very similar situation to Lord of the Rings, as we've said again. Once you get these pretty actors in your mind, then it's even more fun to write your fanfic.
A blonde Russell Crowe? Come on.
Blonde Russell Crowe, exactly. So yeah, this isn't a true sense of the fandom. What's going on AO3 is just stuff that got transferred over or stuff that people were writing much, much later. Anything people are writing now is not really inside the fandom. I don't know how active it is anymore.
I know.
But
people should pick it up, or they should make new ones. I don't care.
As I said to you, I think they are going to, if it actually happens. They were writing a script for a prequel.
Will it be as well made as these? Or will it be a CGI fest? Here's the problem.
Oh
There's
no,
the problem.
CGI. That is going to be
Will it have the craft of Peter Weir? Probably not.
That could be a problem.
We could make a TV show, though.
Yeah, it would be good. Careful what we ask for, because it could be bad. But who knows? And the last thing I will say is, on fan lore, which we love, fan lore is our first resource whenever we are discussing one of these things. The first thing that pops up is a fan work of art by Suzanne Lovett. The OG Suzanne Lovett, who we talked about back in our Star Trek days, our Starsky and Hutch days. She has been around doing all the arts.
I mean, if Suzanne Lovett's doing art for you, you know it's a good ship.
Exactly. You know you're legit if Suzanne Lovett is there. So that's worth seeing. I'm sure we'll post that somehow, somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, give some respect to the fandom. They've been around. It's harder to do fandom pre-AO3. We know this.
I'm honestly shocked that first book is from 1969. I really did not realize that.
Yeah, Patrick O'Brien. Okay. So that's literature.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get into some cultural conversation about the movie.
Okay.
So, a thing that I think is interesting to discuss, an article that just came out recently, actually, talking about the idea of why this movie persists and why people are such fans of it and what makes it so unique and interesting. And the premise of the article is like, why do guys love this movie? Which I think is not that great of a take, really, when like you look
Mm.
at the fandom and there's plenty of non-guys who love this movie. But a thing they're trying to get at that I do think is interesting is the presentation of masculinity in this movie is maybe the most refreshing, appealing thing about it, right? And it's what we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to get at with the idea of all the kids and how warm everyone is and familial and how much they like each other, but also the idea of the intimacy of Jack and Stephen and how they sort of share their feelings and are very open with each other. And there's this feeling of non-toxic masculinity that pervades
Yeah.
the whole thing. Everyone feels like they're, as you said, they're a professional. People are mostly, except in the case of the Jonah,
It's really sad.
not not letting their stupid masculine urges destroy the vibes of the ship.
Right. I think there's like an overlap in my mind between the type of competency that Aubrey presents and this sort of, like good version masculinity that I also think is present in OG Kirk, which is like someone
Yeah.
comes to him and says, I'm a lowly person on the ship, but I have information. And he's just like, great, perfect. Tell me, I will act on it. This is useful. Thank you. More rations for you. Good job. And you're like,
Yes.
yeah. That's how, it's without ego, right? Even though he's invested in like the issue with the Jonah, right, of people respecting the hierarchy,
Yeah.
right, for keeping order on the ship. It's not to the extent where he's like, only I have the knowledge of how to do things and only my position matters. He's like, if you got information or idea, bring it on into the office. I will
Yeah.
stop writing my letter to my wife. I don't give a shit
Exactly.
about this.
And he, much as he does want to maintain whatever sense of order he feels is necessary, he agonizes over the idea of flogging this guy. It's not something that
Mm,
he wants to do. His discussion with Steven is very much like, I'm not the type of captain that does this. Like, this is not a thing that I want to be doing. There's not the idea that violence is the organizing principle of the ship, right? It's more
right.
about respect and competency, and they want to follow Jack because Jack is good at his job, and they know that they will be successful in their mission because Jack is good, and so that's why we
Yes.
will follow him, which is quite nice.
It's
It's
good.
a lovely little situation. And so they, in this article, which I'll end up posting, that was on GQ, they've collected just quotes from men who love this movie and why they love this movie. So they're talking about the bromance. I always hate to say the word, and yet here it is.
Mhm.
You've got a bromance for the ages in Aubrey and Maturin. They're just fucking buds, and they play their violins together as they're traversing the Cape of Horn. It's awesome.
That's true.
It's just a great quote. Writer David Grossman said, Master and Commander is a deeply felt vision of non-toxic masculinity. And then Alex Yablon, I think is the guy they're interviewing for the thing about why he loves it, calls it a portrait of healthy homosociality, which it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Even if you are not reading shippy things into this, this is a lovely way to think about male friendship, right? This is a great relationship that people should be modeling their relationships on. It's
Yeah.
like they can share their feelings and talk to each other about what's
You,
going on with
you
them.
got to tell your friend when they make you feel so low,
It makes me feel so low.
you know? Don't
It's
hold that in.
no, don't let it fester.
No.
So that's lovely. I think that is an interesting way to think about this movie and why affection for it persists, other than the fact that it is also very well made and cool, and you could be
Hmm.
into the battles and into the ships for whatever reason. You're also
Into
into,
the naval strategy.
yeah, you're into the relationships. And you know who in particular is into the relationships?
Who's that now?
You may have heard of him, Taika Waititi.
I have heard of
This led
him.
me into an interesting little rabbit hole that's brought us right back where we began with Our Flag Means Death. So,
Our first excursion into the seas of the
the seas of
Americas.
the Americas. We've come right back around to it. So, there is this lovely interview with him. He's talked, by the way, I found multiple occasions of him talking about Master and Commander. He loves this movie. He's called it his comfort movie. He's talked about how much he loves how it's made. Peter Weir is so great. It made him love the Zoom. Like, he's talked about it a lot. But that one particular quote is someone asking him, "What's your favorite romance movie?" And he said, "Master and Commander." Because Russell Crowe is one of the greatest actors ever. Just that relationship between Russell and that doctor guy, it's palpable. And it's like,
good.
you get it, buddy. That's exactly.
Do you think
the
he
case.
doesn't know Paul Bettany's name?
I don't know. That's a funny thing. That can't be true. They're both in the Marvel universe now. But yeah, off the top of his head, I guess he was like, "I love Crow." And there's also the doctor guy.
Yeah.
So he's bringing this with him as like a major influence. It's one of his favorite movies. He's talked about, like, he's watched it 30, 50 times or whatever. And so then I also have an interview with David Jenkins, who we remember as the creator of Our Flag Means Death. And we talked a little bit at the time about where this came from and the idea that they just like came across the idea of these two real guys and the fact that they sailed together and what was going on with them sailing together. But tonally, apparently, these were their inspirations. David says, Taika talked about Master and Commander. I talked about 24-hour party people because I thought we could maybe combine those vibes. Maybe those are two vibes that could be in the show. This is the inspiration, people, for Our Flag Means Death.
I mean, it's an interesting prospect, but you know, they did it. I say as someone who's not seen 24-hour party people, but I believe in them.
Yes. I mean, it is interesting because the tone of Our Flag Means Death is so specific. Like, yes. That is a show that doesn't feel like pretty much any other show out there. And you can absolutely see the influence of Master and Commander and this relationship between these guys. And it's like if you took the relationship between the Master and Commander guys and took it one step further, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I found that delightful. Good. What a fun little twist.
It's good. So where does that leave us?
I mean, I guess we have to ask the questions.
Yeah.
Is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
I feel like once again we are before queer baiting, yes. Certainly in the novels.
Yeah, in the 1969, I don't think it was queer baiting.
I don't think we can say it's queer canon, and it feels pretty queer, but I don't know that anyone's purposefully coding.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like the question of, can something be queer coded if the people who physically made it did not intend to queer code the thing? Mm-hmm. That's a question I don't know that we've settled on an answer to yet.
Right.
But it feels very queer. It feels like someone somewhere intended this, didn't they? Maybe not.
I don't know.
Maybe it's just a happy accident.
Could be. So it's possible the answer is none.
None of the above. If we gender swap them, would they be a couple?
No, I don't know why a woman would be on this ship.
How could a woman be on this ship? It doesn't make any sense. Women are bad luck on a ship. Everyone knows this.
Right. So, no.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, women don't really... This is one of those things where you can live in this happy space of not feeling like sexism affect you if they just write women out of it entirely. But you know that if, like, they don't think about the women as being people. Like, he's writing his letter to Sophie, but it's not really affecting him. He's not thinking about her a lot. The people that are alive in his mind as people are the men of the ship.
It's a woman-free zone, even though he smiles at that other lady in the boat. He's just like, all right.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say a no on that.
Agreed.
Why isn't it canon? I just don't think anyone was thinking about it, honestly.
No, I don't think that entered into anyone's mind when they were making this. Which is, like, fine.
Sure.
I don't feel like we've been jerked around. I don't feel like anybody was promising us something that they then didn't deliver on. I feel like they just happened to make what reads as a loving queer couple. And they did it accidentally.
It's good. Maybe the series had continued. We'd get more into it. It'd be like, what's going on across space and time? But alas, we've just got this one little movie.
Yeah. So, no queer baiting, which means we don't need to do our queer baiting scale. We can leave this just feeling like it was lovely. What a lovely time.
I think the takeaway from this discussion is, if you haven't seen this movie, watch it.
I think you'd like it, people. You might think, like, I don't know, I'm not really into historical ship stuff. Like, I don't care about the British Navy from 1805. And it's like, it's beside the point. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess if you just like hate all action, that might be a problem
Could
for
be
you.
tough.
But like,
But don't you want to see a man try to go to the Galapagos and his friend being like,
friend.
we're going to go. No, we can't go. But you said we were going to go.
I mean, for the relationship stuff alone, I think you guys should watch this movie. It's very
Yeah.
fun. But it's also just incredibly well made. Watch it. It's very pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World.
A lost gem.
Yeah. Anything else? I feel like that about does it for Master and Commander.
No, again, we watched this movie for our Oscars podcast, and I think we just wanted more opportunity to dig in, talk about it, bring it back to the world as much as we can.
Spread the gospel of Master and Commander.
Yes.
What are we talking about next time?
So next time we will be covering Boy Meets World. We will specifically be covering Eric and Jack from the later seasons of the show. I know I'm looking forward to revisiting it. I think you are as well.
Absolutely. Big fan. Love the college years.
College years so good. Weird thing for to happen in a show. Usually college years so bad.
So bad.
College years so good in Boy Meets World.
Yes.
So yes, that's what we're doing next time.
In the meantime, if you have comments, questions, or concerns, you can reach out to us at ltbkpod@gmail.com or find us on Twitter and Tumblr at ltbkpod. We also have a Discord recently begun, and you can find a link to it on our Tumblr. If you're enjoying the podcast, please tell a friend, leave us a review, and subscribe. The next episode of Let the Boys Kiss will be out in July of 2024.